wild.
Hello and welcome to episode 2392 of Effectively Wild, a FanGraphs baseball podcast brought to you by our Patreon supporters. I'm Meg Rowley of FanGraphs, and I am joined as always by Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer. Well, not as always, but again today.
Yeah.
Is this 2392? It is 2392, and you are Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer, and you are back to being Prime Ben. You have regained your Prime Ben status. Other Ben again.
Good to be back as Prime Ben and not Ben Beta Ben. Some might say I'm Beta Ben all the time. Who knows?
So loaded, there's a lot to that term right now. So that's why I say other Ben. It's more neutral.
Bizarro Ben. I don't know, but I'm back.
Bizarro
and yes, we are not always podcasting together. In fact, we didn't last time, but we are this time. I have returned from my trip, which was to Los Angeles, just for the Ringer's annual in-person meetings. Sometimes we like to see each other's faces, not on a screen. And it was actually energizing to be in one of the World Series cities because you could kind of sense it. If I had not known that there was a World Series taking place this week and that it involved a Los Angeles team, I think I would have quickly become aware of that because there was just sort of World Series excitement everywhere.
Yeah.
And in the lobby of my hotel, there was a life-size Shohei on the wall, like not the actual Shohei, but kind of like a fathead, a cutout sort of, which seemed to be about the size of the actual Shohei. I don't think that's because they knew I was coming and they put it up just for me. I'm sure it was there. And in fact, a hotel close to my hotel has a whole mural, the whole just like ground to ceiling sort of mural of Shohei. And that's not new for the World Series. There's just sort of generally some amount of Shohei mania in LA, which I'm sure is a fraction of how often you see Shohei if you're in Japan, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
It's just absolute inundation. It's saturation with Shohei. But it is nice to see that in an American city in 2025, that much baseball. And I just kind of kept overhearing conversations about the World Series organically. Obviously, some were taking place at the Ringer offices, which is not super surprising, perhaps, to say a sports and culture company. But people talking about baseball who would not normally be talking about baseball, or just overhearing, coming across people just in the street talking about the series. I'm sure it's much the same in Toronto, if not even more pronounced. But
I think so.
To get that kind of excitement and enthusiasm, and that's in a place where there's a lot of other things going on, many forms of entertainment. NBA season just started, a couple teams in LA this year. One of those teams in the news for all sorts of directly basketball-related reasons. Luka, LeBron, plenty of excitement for all of that too. But it feels like a baseball city right now, and that's fun.
Yeah. So committed to baseball say they have their staff meetings during
That's not ideal. I mean, we're very heavy on basketball, and it's not the greatest time to have basketball people meeting either. It was the same last year, in fact. It was the same. I remember. Yeah, and I guess I missed an episode then too, probably. But I remember just writing World Series preview stuff while trying to juggle those meetings, which was not ideal. But so it's time. We are recording on Friday. I took either red-eye or early morning flights, so I'm all sort of screwed up, although I just generally am all the time, day-night cycle-wise. So I got home super early on Friday. I slept a lot during the day, and now we are podcasting in the hours before Game 1 and before our Game 1 live stream. So I enjoyed your World Series preview with other Ben.
Yeah.
Felt like that prepped me for everything.
Good.
And I guess just a few other things I'll add to that. First of all, we have yet another instance of must-win creep. This might be, granted, when Max Scherzer said every postseason game is a must-win, I guess there's nowhere really to go from that. But the Globe and Mail, which is essentially Canada's paper of record, declared Game 1 of the World Series a must-win for the Blue Jays. Game 1, must win. Yeah, the headline, Game 1 of the World Series is a must-win for the Blue Jays, and it's not even a case of a headline distorting a story, because that is what the story said, too.
Wow.
Yeah, against this Dodgers team, there is no distinction between may win and must win games. You don't get a running start. They're already a few steps ahead of you. If they hope to compete, Game 1 is an absolute must-win for the Toronto Blue Jays. Should they lose, they'll start thinking. And once that happens, they're cooked. So I guess by the time this podcast is posted, people will know the outcome of the World Series. Or, well, I guess it's possible that the Blue Jays could win Game 1 and still lose. It doesn't say that if they win Game 1, they will win the series. But we will know whether Toronto has effectively been eliminated. Because if they lose to Blake Snell and the Dodgers, then evidently it's over.
So I don't agree with that assessment, but I will say this. I think this is different. I think this is a little different than the creep that we've been seeing because an actual argument is being made here, right? A position is being put forth to justify what it sounds like the author knows is otherwise a very silly thing to say because it's the first game of a 7-game series, right? And so I'm going to allow it. I'm going to allow it just this once because I think that there's been thought put into an argument, even though, as I've noted, I don't necessarily agree with that argument. So I think it's okay, Ben. I think it's actually okay.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's because the whole point seems to be that if the Blue Jays look down, they'll realize that they're going to collapse or something. Or, if they awake to the stakes of this moment, they will be unmanned. And the Dodgers have been here before, and these Blue Jays haven't really been here. And so they're it's the whole underdog David versus Goliath thing. Well, but nothing about how the Blue Jays have played this postseason suggests to me that they're not ready to rise to the moment. They've been great. They've played the Yankees. They beat the Mariners in 7 games. I mean, they mentally, psychologically certainly seem as prepared as one could be. Granted, the Dodgers have been here before and have been here a bunch of times. And so, maybe they're a bit better acclimated to that than the Blue Jays. But I don't really get the sense that, if they lose Game 1, they're suddenly going to be what are we even doing here? We're just pretenders.
We're
How dare we?
All along.
Yeah, and then they'll just completely fall apart. The point of these Dodgers are very good, and they're favored to win the series, and you sure don't want to lose Game 1. It's bad to lose any game, but, you lose Game 1. I guess the winner of World Series Game 1 has won 76 of 120 series, which is 63%. And it's been higher than that in the wild card era. I don't know whether that means anything, but 24 of 30 in the wild card era. But that also doesn't really suggest any kind of momentum effect because, as people pointed out, Tom Tango noted on Blue Sky that just luck, just a series of coin flips would suggest that you would go on to win 66% of the time. And so, if you figure, Game 1 winner is probably the better team, all else being equal. And so you might expect it to be even higher than the randomness alone would suggest or the probabilities. And in fact, it's lower than that, or at least over the whole span of the World Series. So I don't know. It's true that I guess the Dodgers, as the story notes, have not lost a Game 1 in their run this year or in last year too. And so, maybe you could say give them something to think about here. Right. They haven't had to question themselves because they've gotten off to a lead every time. And obviously they have not been stopped yet in 2024 or 2025. So absolutely agreed. It would be good to win Game 1, but absolute must win. I'm not going to go there.
I think everything that you're saying is sound. And again, I will note that I am not saying that they must win, that they are doomed to a World Series loss if they don't. I will say, and we talked about this on our last live stream, I will admit that I'm relieved to not be doing an entire game that involves the Mariners for another live stream. And you know what? I don't know if anyone would come away liking me better for it. I think this is, I'm not saying it's for the best. I'm still quite sad about the whole thing. We don't have to linger on it. Ben and I processed this loss. We don't have to.
My condolences, which I expressed to you off air.
You did. But I think the odds of people coming away thinking like that Meg, she's well-adjusted, much higher now. One thing we noted on our last live stream is that there is something about like, the first time that the Phillies made a deep postseason run with this group, they had the air of a beautiful himbo. I don't even think they were outmatched really in any of their rounds, but they just had this air of like, we're just a bunch of guys being dudes, bros being gentlemen. And they had a himbo-esque air about them. And I think that there is a little something. There is a little something. I don't think it's a lot of something, but I do think there is a little something to the like, it's better when Wile E. Coyote doesn't look down. And I agree with you that like this team, lest we forget, they lost their first 2 games in the ALCS. They lost them at home. They lost them at home to the Mariners, a Mariners team that was throwing exhausted guys. And they didn't blink, and they didn't back down, and they took that series to 7 and they won, and here they are. And so I think that they've peered into the void before and managed to not be consumed by it. But I do think that sometimes if you're able to like just be guys being dudes and dudes being bros, that you have a lightness to you, you play loose as they say. And there's a little something to that. Is it a decisive something? No, I don't believe so at all. But there's a little something. There's a little something. So and you might know that like if Trey Savage comes out and is able to game 1 starter, Trey Savage, what a year. What a year for the young man.
I know.
My goodness. But if he comes out and dominates the Dodgers lineup, or even just gives them good length, and keeps it close so that they can minimize the bullpen's exposure to that lineup, you might come away feeling more confident about the direction of the series, which again doesn't doom them to failure later or guarantee success. But I do think you would feel like, oh, well, this rook was able to hold them in check. Well, we might have something here. And to be clear, I think they already feel that way. This is a very confident seeming Blue Jays team. They do not strike me as cowering. They are not afraid. But sometimes it's good to be a himbo. It's good to be a it's like a whole team of
Phillies
Kens.
haven't really ceased to be himbos, to be clear. I don't think subsequent to that first run.
Vibes a little different. They got an infusion of revitalization, a refreshing of himboism when they traded for Bader. Bringing Bader in, it's like the himbo vibes are back. That guy has immaculate vibes. He really does. It's really great.
Yeah. No, I love the Savage story. It's so much fun for him to make his professional debut and to pitch at as many levels as he did this year, as we have discussed, going from A-ball to high A to double A to triple A to the majors in a single season, and then pitch in the ALDS and the ALCS and the World Series. He's basically done it all, I guess.
Yeah.
They skipped the wild card round, so he couldn't check that box off. But basically, he has pitched every stop that you could in a single season, and he absolutely deserves to get a start in this World Series or 2.
Yeah.
He's absolutely proved that he's one of the best pitchers on that team. And there's no one other than Gausman I'd rather see pitching for the Blue Jays right now. And, he's been up and down. Like, he had a great start against the Yankees and then against the Mariners. I mean, even when he had success against them, it was them kind of running into outs and making mistakes as much as it was anything. Like, they had decent production against him. They just didn't really convert that into runs, which is pretty important. But he does not seem at all not ready to rise to the moment. Like, he said, I mean, when he first came up and, you're in the thick of a race for the AL East and they bring him up during that stretch run. And he said, there are 5-year-olds who play this game. I think that me at 22 years old, I can do it just fine. Which, if you can have an attitude like that, I mean, there are 5-year-olds who play the game. They don't play it well, and they don't play it with any real pressure or spotlight or attendance the way that a major league starter does. But if you can think of it that way, if you could get in that headspace where, hey, like I'm just playing with house money, a 5-year-old could do this, what's no sweat, then that's great. I think if you can somehow maintain that. And another quote I saw from him, which I thought was relatable, he said, I try to treat pressure as if it's not as high pressure as it is mentally, which maybe sounds simplistic, but that's sort of how I try to do it. I have not made a World Series start, to be clear, but we all have our personal World Series start, I guess, whatever the high pressure moment in our lives is. And it might feel almost as high pressure to you as something like that does to him, because, you kind of adapt to your circumstances and your experience. So whatever things have scared me in the past, that is kind of how I put that anxiety aside, just like compartmentalize it a little bit, just like, yeah, it exists, like it's scary, like there's a part of me that is nervous, but I will just kind of act as if I'm not. I'll just sort of pretend, and I'll hopefully fool everyone, and I'll fool myself, and that's kind of how it works for me to do things without being super nervous, or at least outwardly super nervous, because I think most people, they're not just completely impervious to pressure or anxiety. I'm sure some people are, and it varies. And, you talk about like the pitchers with the slow heartbeats, that kind of thing, which like sounds like it could be dangerous, but they mean it in terms of, you're just not showing your fear so much. But I think a lot of people do feel it. They're just able to bury it a little bit, or put it aside, or just accept it, embrace it, perform despite feeling that thing. It's like people who talk about heroism, or, you're in combat or whatever. It's not like you're not terrified. It's just that you manage to function. You somehow just be of two minds, basically, where you're just not completely undone by that fear that you're feeling, but it's not as if you're feeling no fear.
Yeah, I feel ill-equipped to offer other people advice on how best to navigate anxiety without it being debilitating. Although, I say that, but it's not like I don't get stuff done. I just feel pressed upon like the whole time I'm doing it. It doesn't matter. I think that it's a just tremendously valuable perspective for a pro athlete to have, because you're right. Like, everybody has their pressures. Everybody faces, personal tragedy, or even just inconvenience. Everybody has work stuff that goes sideways on them. We all have our stuff. But as we've said many times on the podcast, like when I have a goof at work, nobody knows that. I mean, like the people I work with do, but like, a random person in Toronto isn't aware of that fact, and my mom's not sitting there watching me make the mistake, so it's a tremendously strange profession, and it's a really, I would imagine, awkward thing to navigate, and to be able to have sort of a, look, this is hard, and it's not that you can't say it doesn't matter, right? Like sometimes athletes will take that approach, like they're a little too cavalier, and it's like, well, I don't believe you, because no one could engage with this set of circumstances and really be as immune to the concept of pressure as you are. But I think that you're just trying to, not have it overwhelm the moment. And that's easier said than done for some guys. If he's able to like really have that perspective and live in it as like a 22-year-old, my God, but like that's almost as impressive as the splitter.
I know. So. Yeah. It's hard to beat the Dodgers, but it's harder if you're beating yourself. So if you can somehow...
tell Dan Wilson that.
Yeah. Well, if you could somehow lay that anxiety aside so that you are at least giving your peak performance, and that may or may not be good enough.
Might not be enough, but...
Yeah, but at least you will know that you have put yourself in the best position to succeed. And he's just an incredible story, and there's been a lot said about the Dodgers versus splitters, and it's the postseason of splitters, and you got Gausman splitter, and you've got your Savage's splitter, and the Dodgers have done perfectly fine against splitters this season, but they haven't face them so much in the postseason. So there's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about the small ball this postseason, all the intentional walks and the bunting and the not running, though. You sort of have to exclude stealing bases from the small ball because that's just not happening. Not that these two teams are particularly adept or equipped for that anyway. But I really like a lot of angles of this, many of which you and other Ben discussed last time. But it stands out to me that there is kind of this underdog narrative surrounding the Blue Jays, which makes sense, but probably wouldn't make sense against any other team. It's like the Dodgers turn any opponent into an underdog because of their stretch of sustained success and because of the payroll and everything else and because of the star power. No one else can compare with that wattage. But the Blue Jays are kind of an unlikely underdog. Like I know that they haven't been back in the World Series since 1993 and there is that factor, but really, like, this is a top 5 payroll team that had a better record than the Dodgers. Like, it's odd that you come into a series where the underdog has home field advantage. And it's just like, it doesn't seem like it should quite compute. And I agree that it does. I'm not arguing that the Blue Jays are not underdogs or that the Dodgers are not favored in this series. I tend to think that because it's baseball, it's probably closer to 60-40 or something than, the typical people treating it as if it's over or it's automatic that the Dodgers will just steamroll right through them here. But yeah, absolutely, the Dodgers are the better team or should be favored to win the series. But the Blue Jays, they have star power. They can't quite compete with the Dodgers in that category who can, but they have Vladdy, who they signed to a $500 million contract, right? Like their top 5 payroll, big media market, huge TV ratings because 1 out of every 6 Canadians is watching their ALCS games, right? Like it's just given that and their success, and they won the AL East this year. They've had the best record in the league. Like it's just a weird dynamic there where we talked about the Brewers underdog and kind of pumping that up and describing themselves as underdogs, which was also weird in a way because they had the best record in baseball this year. But you get it from a market size and payroll perspective much more than it applies to Toronto.
Yeah, I think that to say that there isn't a gap would be disingenuous, but to make them out as like, a David to the Dodgers Goliath is overstating the case too. Like I think our Zips game by game odds have it as like a 60-40 split. That seems about right. Like from a true talent perspective, that seems about right. I think that you're right to note that like the Blue Jays are a top 5 payroll. There is a meaningful gap between the Dodgers and the next team down, but like it's not like they're not the Brewers. People are talking about them like they're the Brewers, and they're not the Brewers. Does that mean that they're gonna steamroll Los Angeles? I mean, no, but I think that this series is going to be a competitive one, and I think the other thing about it, and I'm going to say this and you're going to go, well, that's a pretty big advantage to have concentrated, Meg. And I'm going to, yeah, buddy, I hear you. A lot of the advantage for Los Angeles is heavily concentrated in their rotation advantage. It is a meaningful advantage, right? Yeah. Like to be able to roll out this version of Snell and Yamamoto and Glasnow and Ohtani versus like you have 2 good starters in Toronto and then like, Scherzer and Bieber, and you just don't know what you're going to get out of those guys, right? Like they could give you surprising length. We saw that version of Bieber in the postseason, and then we saw the wobblier version, right? Is Scherzer going to be able? We saw the 2 versions of Scherzer in his same start, like that. So they are not equipped to go long in the same way, and you end up having sort of a multiplicative effect in terms of advantage because not only can the Dodgers give you length, they can give you length in the face of having to rely on the weakest part of their roster, which is that bullpen, which unfortunately has had some turnover because Vesia is not available for this series probably. Kasperius didn't make the postseason roster. Whatever is going on with Alex Vesia, I just wish the best for you and your family, buddy. But, like they are able to paper over some of their deficiencies by not having to hand the ball to the bullpen potentially until they're handing it to Roki, whereas the Blue Jays, I can easily imagine Gausman and Yusevich going deep into that game. I also can imagine like Trey Yusevich walking a bunch of guys and getting into trouble. And even if those two guys go deep, you don't know that you're going to be able to do that with, Scherzer and Bieber. And if Gausman and Yusevich can't go deep, well, then the bullpen is really exposed, because it's just not a super strong group. It's like Jeff Hoffman and his kids' names. How's that not been it was Jeff Hoffman, right? Wasn't it Jeff Hoffman that had creative spellings? Creative spellings.
Yes.
Creative. We're not issuing a judgment. We're not saying anything one way or the other. We're not making fun of children.
Yep.
Or their names.
Non-standard. Yes.
Non-standard. I like creative. Non-standard sounds more judgmental than creative to me.
Yeah, it's true. We can stick with creative.
Creative. There's like creative spellings. But so again, like to say that there is a gap between these two clubs, yeah, for sure. To say that it's like going to be a cakewalk seems too dramatic to me. And that is the way that it's being talked about, particularly since like George Springer seems fine now. If they had the version of George Springer that was playing in Game 6 of the ALCS, I'd be like, you're in really big trouble. And they have this wild card, which is Bo Bichette. They're like really just like, hey, Bo, you go get it, man. He's playing second base and I think batting cleanup. Like, okay, we're going to see what we got with Bo, man. That is, again, confidence. That is some confidence. I was like, you don't want to just like give him a DH day? Good.
I know.
I guess you're going to sit Barger against Snell anyway, or IKF. You're gonna sit IKF against Snell, but like.
Yeah, this is the thing that you and Ben did not know because it had not been announced yet when you recorded. I mean, you presumed that Bichette would be on the roster, but weren't sure exactly where he would fit in. And we're recording now after the Game 1 lineup was announced. And
I'm just grappling with it in its entirety. Oh, boy. So you have Straw in there to play right. Okay.
Yes, that's fun. So we could get the Miles Straw versus Roki Sasaki showdown that everyone's waiting for.
I've been
the guy the Blue Jays acquired
in
an effort to acquire Sasaki and ended up being more valuable than he was by a lot during the regular season, at least, though Roki is certainly proving his value now. But I guess
you would set Barger against.
I
always want to say Barger, but then I want to throw an extra syllable in there. Why do I want to do that?
I don't know. It's
Barger.
Barger.
It's Barger. Yeah. It's not Barger. It's Barger.
Just Barger. Yeah.
And he also bats lefty, so.
To have Bichette come back, which on paper, of course, you want Bo Bichette. Why would you not want Bo Bichette? I mean, it's
weird you don't have IKF in there because he bats righty. What is happening to my brain, Ben?
It's been a long postseason. But for Bichette to come back and to be in the starting lineup as a second baseman,
right?
Where, in theory, he should be equipped to play second base. He's not a great shortstop, and so maybe that's a better place for him. Who knows? But to do it on the fly like this, he's
never played second base in the majors.
No, he hasn't played it since in the minors in 2019 for a game or so. So, he was taking some grounders the other day, and that was, maybe that's just, for flexibility, versatility. No, like this was his idea. He suggested that this would be a way to get him into the lineup. And if he can do it well, then you get to keep Jimenez at short, which helps your defense, obviously. Yes. And you get to keep Clement in there at third, who's been, I guess maybe Vlad aside, your best bat improbably in this postseason. Insane. And then you do get to DH Springer, which I don't know how advantageous that is. I don't know how his knee is doing and how mobile he is. So I guess
I think we maybe have learned a little something about it by virtue of them deciding to DH him, right?
Yeah, if he were 100%, no restrictions whatsoever, then maybe you wouldn't need to do this. So maybe that does tell us something. And so maybe that's your best defensive alignment if Bo Bichette feels comfortable there at second base.
It's so fascinating because I feel like I must explain the way that my brain misfired. because it is instructive to like how I view this team and how the Blue Jays view this team. So Toronto loves good defense. They have built their roster around the concept of it. They really like to be able to put their best defensive alignment on the field. I agree with them that Miles Straw is a better defender than Addison Barger, whose name I've never struggled to say, and I never want to insert an extra syllable. It's because we were talking about Jeff Hoffman and his creatively spelled children's names.
So where would the extra syllable go?
I don't know. I want to make him like Barger or Barger. I don't know. Ben. I don't know.
People occasionally call me Lindenberg, and it's like, where did you get that extra syllable in there? So
it's like they're making your name Lindbergh and Hindenburg at the same time. That's like a really, honestly, terrifying combination of things.
Yeah.
No, but so clearly they think, and I agree with them, that Miles Straw is a better pure defender than Addison Barger. But Addison Barger is a better hitter than Miles Straw. And so I'm just a little surprised, but also Barger bats left. And you can't put IKF out there. You don't want that. So if you're locked in, the reason that my brain kind of went on a little spinning thing is because I was like, oh, well, they'll play against Snell. Surely they'll play IKF, who bats righty. And I've never gotten that wrong either, but I didn't remember that they're DHing Springer. So here's what they're telling us. They're telling us that Springer's knee isn't 100%, but also that they just are really like prizing the defense. But then they're starting Bo at second. So I think that Springer's knee has to be a little goofy still, because I think that ideally, wouldn't you just rather DH Bo first game back?
Yeah, you'd think, just to not throw him right into the deep end.
But then you have to put Springer in the outfield if you do that, because it's not like you're not going to not play him. You're not going to not play him, Ben, you know?
Right. Barger bats left, in case anyone is confused.
Right.
And
Barger
Snell
bats left.
Throws left. Yeah.
Left. Right. So
and his name is Barger.
Barger. So you would normally sit Barger against Snell anyway.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
But Ben, I didn't make, we were even talking about Bo Bichette playing second, but then my brain didn't go to that means that George Springer's DHing. So then you need an outfielder. So you can't play, you're not going to play IKF out there. That would be bananas. So you're going to play. So it's interesting. Well, but he is a better defender than Schneider. Anyway, this is Meg trying to remember stuff after she's been on the phone for like 6 hours today.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time.
A lot of talking, and some still ahead of us. But
Barger. So
indeed.
Easy. It's just an easy name to say. Barger. Say it all the time.
Even IKF has played some outfield. He could do it. He could play almost anything. But why would you? I
don't think he's very good out there.
Yeah. So
I've gotten in trouble for talking about IKF's defense in the past. But.
Yeah, not his outfield positional player ranking, but other positions that he has played.
Anyway, all of that to say,
it's creative.
It's interesting.
Much like the names, the spellings of Jeff Hoffman's kids.
Well, it's again, it's just maybe telling us something interesting about the state of George Springer. You know, mostly it's maybe just telling us something interesting there, and especially relative to Bo, you know?
Yeah, and there is some precedent for people making their debut at a position in the postseason. It's happened a few times. It happened last year with John Birdie, who played first base for the Yankees. So this will be the fourth time that someone has made their first career start at a fielding position, not counting pitcher or DH in the postseason. And, you know, this is, I guess, minimum 300 career regular season games, because, of course, there are some players who have made their major league debuts in the postseason. Right. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about playing a different position than the one you normally play in the majors. So it was John Birdie last year, Carlos Santana, who played left field for Cleveland for the first time in the majors back in 2016. I think he had played left field a little bit, but he hadn't started there. And then Jake Flowers back in 1931 World Series, as we all recall, made his debut at the hot corner for the Cardinals.
It's a nice name.
Yeah, Bo Bichette. So we'll see how he does. And it's also interesting, like, on the eve of free agency to switch positions like that. Like, I wonder if he's thinking of it as this could only help me because I'm showing my versatility and my flexibility and my willingness to play other places. It's kind of like when Alex Bregman was a free agent. He's like, I'll play second, I'll play whatever. But then again, if you're a shortstop, many players are pretty precious about that. Then they want to keep playing shortstop because you think your value would be higher there. Or I could sign my big long-term deal. Like, I don't want people to think of me as a second baseman when I'm about to hit the free agent market, even if maybe they already do because of how you play shortstop and how long you'll be able to. But that's interesting. I don't know whether he's even weighing that because right now his focus is probably on winning the World Series and then winning free agency.
I suspect that his primary, to the extent that he's thought about it, the thing that he might really be prioritizing is just demonstrating that he's healthy. But if I were Bo, I don't know. I don't know if I'd rather play a shaky second base, but show that I'm healthy enough to play in the field. And I don't think anyone's worried that his injury issue is long-term, but I do think that people have long-term concern about Bo playing shortstop, which they should. And he will be buoyed somewhat by the fact that, he had a good year at the plate after not. And the shortstop market is just so shallow. It's not very many guys at all. Especially if people are like, yeah, Alex Bregman, you are a third baseman, not a shortstop. Sometimes he was like, maybe I'm a shortstop. And they're like, no, I don't think so.
I am somewhat surprised by that, but that will be something to watch in this game, which is over by the time you're hearing this, or throughout the series, perhaps.
Yeah, everybody okay, here are your two reactions. Oh my God, I can't believe the amazing play that Bo made. And then here's the other one. Oh my God, what a terrible error.
That was a bad idea.
What will they do? But they'll get 6 more, theoretically.
Yes. And we'll see whether the old axiom about the ball will find you, we'll see whether that happens, right? Whether the first batted ball is to Bo or some crucial batted ball is hit to Bo in some high leverage situation, whether that old saying is proven out or not. And I am curious to see something that will have already happened, which is, does Blake Snell continue this very recent run of efficiency and going deep into games?
A Blake Snell game for the live stream. I can't.
Yeah, but it's not the old Blake Snell.
Well,
maybe.
That's what you think.
We'll see if he devolves back into the old Blake Snell. But
if we end up with a 4-hour game, I'm going to be furious.
Well, the pitch clock does put some limits on Blake Snell. He tests them by just throwing more pitches historically, because you can't stop that. You can put a limit on how long he can take between pitches, but you can't force him not to throw many pitches. But he has changed that himself. And I don't want to overstate it. Of course, this season, he was still the same old Blake Snell a lot of the time. And in previous seasons, he'd actually gone deeper into games on average in previous seasons. And it's just, it depends. If he's hurt or at less than 100% capacity, or if he's at his best when he is basically the best. And just this postseason run where he's gone 6, 7, 8 and is throwing more pitches in the strike zone. He's not the ultimate strike zone pounder, but relative to his past performance, he is showing a greater willingness to be more efficient and, get some kind of contact. And as I always say, pitching to contact is not necessarily the same as being efficient, because it's good to get strikeouts, because when people put the ball in play, sometimes those balls in play become hits, and then you have to face someone else. You didn't get it out at all. But he's been nibbling a little less lately. And we'll see if that continues, and we'll see if the Blue Jays help him out, because as Ben noted last time, they've been very aggressive. They were 4th in pitches per plate appearance in the regular season among all lineups this year, and they've been first by a lot in this postseason. So that does matter, with the Dodgers bullpen being just an almost entirely theoretical weakness so far. It's a real weakness, and yet it has not been exposed at all. And I wrote about this, and, I've been harping on just how much starting pitcher in relief action we've gotten this postseason. And I ran the numbers on that. And thus far, it would be unprecedented in the wild card era, the percentage of relief innings this postseason pitched by guys who were primarily starting pitchers in the regular season. And it's the Dodgers and the Brewers did that most of all. and the Cubs to some extent. And it's, partly like bulk guys and that kind of thing and extra inning games and emergency starter action. But it's not just that. And for the Dodgers, it's the plan. And they've been able to pursue and execute that plan perfectly because they've had 70% of their innings thrown by their starting pitchers, which is their strength. And then most of their relief innings also thrown by starting pitchers, primarily Roki Sasaki. And then it's like the remaining out of 14% or 16% or something. It's a very small number of their innings have actually been thrown by real relievers. And if they could continue to make that the case, then that would bode very well for them in this series. And if the Blue Jays bats help them out by making quick outs, obviously if they're aggressive and they aggressively get hits and runs, that's perfectly fine. But if, as was the case in a couple of the games in previous series, they make quick outs, then that's not going to be good for them. I mean, that's obviously not good. That's like self-evidently not good, but it's particularly not good against the Dodgers because that will play right into their hands.
Yes, it makes one of your primary strengths into a weakness if what it means is extending how many times you're seeing Snell, how many times you're seeing Yamamoto, et cetera. Especially if you're Addison Barger, who bats lefty, unlike Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, who bites right. Sometimes you just have to get ahead of people being like, hey, you dummy, just to satisfy them and just say no, it's just a little misfire in my brain because of course Springer's DHing if Bo Bichette is playing second base. You can't have two DHs and he's not going to. So anyway, I just sometimes I feel self-conscious. Anyway.
It's okay. Just put it out of your mind like Trey Savage.
I was going to say I need to be like Trey. I need to be like I wouldn't be 22 again though. I wouldn't be 22 again for anything in the whole wide world, It's the thing they don't tell you about your 30s that I just wish I could impress upon people in their 20s is that they are generally really great, except for the fact that you have to worry about back pain, maybe.
Yeah.
But you're settled. You're settled in yourself. It's really nice.
Yeah. I feel like I've been the same person forever. I don't know.
Yeah, but you're less anxious than I am. So that makes sense.
As someone who professionally covers baseball and video games and Star Wars and stuff, to some extent, I feel like I never quite grew up, or I grew up when I was a kid or something. Old soul. I don't know. I was always into older stuff. And I look back and I rarely think I was so young. How could I have thought that? How could I have acted that way? I feel like I've been sort of the same. I know a lot of people feel younger than they are. There's been a lot written about that. You feel like your mental age is some degree younger than your physical age. But I feel kind of like I would get along with my younger selves if I was hanging out with kid Ben or adolescent Ben or young adult Ben. We'd basically be on the same page because I've been sort of, I don't know, maybe I'm deceiving myself and that's not actually the case. And I would find my younger selves to be intolerable or cringy or something. I'm sure that's true to some extent, but I don't know. I don't lament my misspent youth any more than I lament my adulthood, I guess. So maybe they could both be misspent, but probably in the same sort of way.
That's the spirit.
Yeah. So I do think that as I was saying, the underdog narrative, it is sort of silly, but it's also sensible because it's just that the Dodgers, anyone is an underdog compared to the Dodgers. The Blue Jays, I think, a lot less than most opponents would be, but there is still some element of truth to it. And there's been a lot said about how, the Blue Jays made a run at Shohei and at Sasaki, and now the Dodgers got them, and now they're going to face the Blue Jays, and absolutely everyone made the joke about Shohei Ohtani being on a plane to Toronto, etc. But the fact that the Blue Jays were finalists for those guys or really made aggressive runs at them, that's sort of what I'm saying, because most teams weren't really ever in the running for those guys. They weren't going to pony up the money for Ohtani, or they just did not make as compelling a pitch as they evidently did to Sasaki. And so, yes, there is a meaningful difference because the Dodgers actually landed those guys and the Blue Jays didn't. And the Dodgers have the number one payroll with a bullet, and the Blue Jays are top 5, but there's a big difference between number 5 and number 1. There's a big difference between signing Roki Sasaki and Shohei Ohtani and coming close-ish to signing them, as Blue Jays fans discovered. But there's a pretty short list of teams that were ever really in the running for those guys, made a really aggressive effort or had the financial resources to make a play. And the Blue Jays are in that group. That's all I'm saying. You know, so it's not really a haves and have-nots kind of differential. It's have most versus have a lot. So it's a meaningful distinction, certainly. But it could be much bigger if it were virtually any other team except, I don't know, the Yankees or someone.
I mean, there's like a definite gap, but you're right. Like they're in a conversation that a lot of other teams aren't in from like a competing for free agents perspective. And I know that they had a lot of disappointment sort of hyper concentrated in a way that made it feel like there was something like wrong with the franchise or what have you. And, you know, maybe there is. I don't know. You know, maybe they need to work on their pitch a little bit. But I also just think that the particular alchemy of the Dodgers plus like high profile, either international free agents immediately coming over from Japan or guys like Ohtani on their second stop, like there is something about that combination that is so specific to the Dodgers. And that isn't to say that like every Japanese player who comes over is going to sign with LA. I mean, if nothing else, like they do have roster constraints just like everybody else, right? They can only have 26 guys up there. But I do think that it is useful to keep in mind that like they really do seem to do well in that market. And it's a combination of like the existing concentration of players from Japan on their roster, the way that some of those guys grew up Dodger fans. And then like you do kind of get like a snowballing effect where it's like, okay, we are able to offer something from a, you know, endorsement perspective, what have you, that seems pretty not unique, but special, and well positioned there. So I don't know. It's not that it doesn't mean anything. It's just that it maybe doesn't mean quite the things that people want it to or think it does. I don't know. Yeah. And gosh, like some of it too is just like there's just some bad reporting that happened there, you know, unfortunately. Yeah. And so how close was it really? I don't know. You know, I don't know the answer to that.
That's a valid question, too. Yeah. And the Dodgers can only roster 26 players on their active roster. They can afford to have basically like half a team of highly paid players on the IL.
Oh, yeah.
They don't have more IL spots than anyone else. It's just that they tend to have higher salaries on the IL for a lot of the season than most teams do. And yeah, that's true that perhaps being a finalist for those guys, there was some question about like, is that a distinction without a difference to be a finalist versus not a finalist? How close was it actually really? Are you deluding yourself, or is it some kind of confusing or inaccurate reporting about how close it actually was?
Right.
But yeah, and really there's a difference because there's been a lot of conversation about does the Dodgers' location, not just their geographic location, but also does that give them a leg up, especially when it came to the Japanese players who would have a shorter travel time, but also just the big market and the endorsement deals and all of that. Not that Toronto is not also a big market. But with the Blue Jays, there's been the conversation about does this hurt them? Is this an extra hurdle, their location? Because they have had a hard time persuading some of the top free agents to sign just because it's a different country and it's a different currency and whatever else, right? And so at times it seems as if they have a harder recruiting pitch and the Dodgers have an easier recruiting pitch, but the Blue Jays, to their credit, they still just do keep going out there. And if they miss out on their top target or their number 2 target or their number 3 target, as the case may be, then they will sign someone. They'll go get someone. And granted, it's not as if they're here really because when they failed to sign some of those top targets, they then pivoted to backup plans. They signed Anthony Santander or Max Scherzer or whoever it is. And Jeff Hoffman. Hoffman's obviously played an important role in the postseason after a kind of iffy regular season. Some of those other guys they signed didn't do that much to contribute to them getting here. They weren't really core contributors.
Yeah.
And so, but they did show a willingness to say, well, we missed out on this guy. We'll at least not just put that money in the bank and gain interest. We'll actually go spend it on some guys. And I guess that's not always super advisable if like you miss out on the elite target. Is it best to then say, well, we'll settle for the consolation. We'll go get Anthony Santander, which hasn't worked out super well for them thus far. But, like, is it good to still splash around in that pool of the lower tier of free agents who maybe aren't giving you that same kind of elite value for the elite dollars that the top tier guys command? But I do appreciate and respect that when they miss out on someone like that, they're not just like, oh, well, I guess we're not going to go get anyone. That. Yeah, right. Yeah. Because like you've signaled that you have the money to spend. Everyone knows that now. And so you do have to spend some, and maybe some you spend on Vlad and you keep him. So that's pretty important too.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of ways to do it. And I do think it's always useful for teams to be engaged in some amount of self-reflection about like how they how do they approach those conversations with free agents? How do they position themselves relative to other teams? What kind of case are they able to make about their player development? But I do think that sometimes we overreact to individual free agent classes. Some of it is just like there are so many things that go into that decision for the player, and a lot of it's going to come down to money, but it's not all going to be that. Like, yeah, maybe some years the fact that it's another country and another currency is a disadvantage. Maybe there are going to be years here where it not being here is good for them from a recruiting perspective, right? Like, these things aren't. They are often changing at the same time. And so I do think that you want to be self-reflective and you want to put a good pitch together, and, how you fit all the pieces of your organization together, the reputation you have in other parts of the club, they are going to matter to guys. But I think that it seems obvious that the Blue Jays are willing to satisfy the money piece of it, which is still going to be the biggest piece for a lot of guys. And so I don't think that it's, necessarily dispositive on their success for them to like lose out on individual cases. You know what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do enjoy that this feels like such a global World Series in terms of the interest, just to a greater extent, because of course you have two countries directly involved here, but it feels like you have three because the Japanese audience is just, it's so huge as long as these Dodgers are involved and as long as Shohei and Yamamoto are starting games and Sasaki in theory is closing them. The ratings there have been huge. Yeah. The ratings in Canada per capita have been huge. And then you have your usual US audience. So it does feel like just more people, more countries all over the world are just really plugged into this series. And that's nice,
It's great.
It's not like it's going to affect whether we watch or not. No. We'll be watching regardless, but it is nice to feel like more people are in on it. It's a communal experience. So I'm excited about that. And obviously MLB is too, because we've been receiving press releases about how great the ratings have been.
Okay. Can we talk about one thing, though? This is so unimportant, but you are much more tapped into music than I am. I like music. This is an anti-music take. But like, I would say that you listen very broadly, even though you have tended to start to tack toward things that you're familiar with because you're in your 30s. And I don't want to be disrespectful because it could be that, I know he's also a producer. It's not just him as a musical artist. What is the league's understanding of like where Pharrell sits in the musical landscape at this juncture? Because I feel like this is confusing. He is on their official commercials. He's performing before game 1 of the World Series. What's up with that, Ben? Because it feels like a recession indicator to me. And like the ads where he's like directing the choir and they sing beautifully. And you got the whole orchestra, but it just feels very like it feels very 2008 coded to me in a way that makes me nervous about like the housing market. So what's going on? What's going on?
Yeah, it's
what's happening?
I guess his star power is probably past its zenith, I suppose we could say.
And it's not that it's non-existent.
No.
It's not that it's non-existent. It's
very
also
well
just
known.
like,
yes,
he's very well known, such a, and a very important, like his career is storied. But like, isn't he mostly just like on The Voice now?
Well, a lot of people watch that, so
I don't understand that either. Sorry for swearing. I understand it more than what's the Masked Singer?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care for that. The ads for that. I haven't for a long time. It just feels like, what are we doing? This is like Hunger Games. I just, I'm just like, anyway, I don't understand. We got a whole press release about it when they were like, here's the sneak peek at Pharrell's new commercial. And then now I'm feeling nervous that I'm saying Pharrell wrong. Like I was trying to say Addison Barger's name weird.
Yeah,
it's Pharrell, right?
It was Farrell all along. No,
it's not right. That. It's Pharrell. Okay. Oh, thank God. And so I'm just like, I'm a little perplexed because like, I think that, some of his, and again, he has produced more recently, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah,
but it's like, wasn't his most recent, like very famous song, that Happy song from.
And that was everywhere and to some extent still is, but that was
torturous
12 years ago.
Right.
Yeah,
and then it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, yeah.
It made me happy, but sure.
The first time you heard it.
Well, yes, he is a 52-year-old man. It's true. I mean, it's
he
baseball.
Looks great.
He does. So maybe it's you want someone baseball audience has heard of. I don't know,
and he's not wearing the hats anymore. Like
we got a press release about the Jonas Brothers performing as well. So look, I mean, I don't know.
I'm about to feel really bad about how old the Jonas Brothers are. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's have this primal
They've been
scream.
with us as a society for quite some time. So.
They're younger than me? Oh no, Ben. They're all younger than me. Oh no.
Yeah, look.
I thought they were going to be old and that was going to feel bad, but no, them being younger feels worse.
Pharrell's, look, he's an A-lister, I think, Is he an A-plus lister? Perhaps not. And is he at his peak? Perhaps not. But I don't think it's a bad get. I get what you're saying about the cultural relevance, but then I suppose you could say the same about Major League Baseball. So I don't know. Maybe we're past the point where MLB is getting Bad Bunny in the All-Star Celebrity Softball game. Like he's leveled up. He's the halftime show performer. So maybe now MLB is going to get Pharrell. But look, I'm not unhappy about it.
It just feels like, again, it feels recession coded. And some of it is like the bringing in the big orchestral number with the gospel choir. Gospel choirs are amazing, but you know what I'm saying? There's like a particular musical aesthetic that it feels like it's emulating, and it is not one that is like super of the moment. Like,
I guess baseball is in a recession in a sense over a long enough time frame. I think in recent years, it's business is booming. Things are picking up.
The youngest Jonas brother is like 33, Ben. No,
yeah. No, there's a super young. Wait, isn't there like a super young?
Nick Jonas is only 33. I don't care for that shit at all. I don't care for that at all.
Well, I'm sorry that you had to be confused because there's Frankie. Frankie's in his 20s, but
who is Frankie? What did Frankie ever do?
It's the other, not one of the originals, but the next.
But he is related to them?
Yes, he is a Jonas brother, but just was not. He's not one of the Jonas brothers. Yes.
Oh, it's not generous for them to have pictures of him as a little kid on his Wikipedia. That feels mean.
Well, now you know about Frankie Jonas. At least we didn't get a MLB press release about Frankie Jonas performing at the national anthem. That might have been a step down. Okay, so we will reconvene to talk about the first 2 or 3 games of the series sometime early next week. I am very much looking forward to it. One thing that you and Ben touched on, the Google AI ads, the baseball-themed ads, are the plate taps is that real is my question. Because I think there are two separate questions. It's like, is this a good stat to highlight, which is primarily what you and Ben talked about, just like how frivolous it is. And like, this is not actual actionable information. This is not really sabermetrics. You have this fancy technology and you're using it on something so seemingly insignificant. But the first time I saw that, and the next 10 times, I wasn't totally sure if this was like a joke. Was this like satire, or was this just kind of like a fake, like a hypothetical illustration of what you could do with AI from Google Cloud or whatever?
But are you asking if they really track bat taps with StatCast?
Yes, that's what I'm asking. I mean, it's not something you can look up on Baseball Savant, but I assume that that's real. Like when they say that 125 hitters tapped home plate in last year's postseason, and they compare the hard hit rates of the tappers versus the non-tappers, I assume that they are actually investigating that, right? Like that they actually tracked the bat taps. This is not just, we could look this up or imagine if we could, this is the kind of thing that you can do. Because like we can't look that up, but I assume that that is accessible to them, which actually sort of impresses me in a way, because it's not as if the bat tracking tech was designed to track whether you tap the bat. It's more about the swing and the trajectory of the swing. And so it sort of surprises and impresses me that they could capture bat taps. I guess it makes sense, but that's probably like a bespoke query. Like that's probably not something that's in the database, and they had to do some special analysis, which is probably why it's restricted to last postseason, I guess. Maybe they had to do it, or maybe they even kind of fudged it and did it in a more manual way to make it seem like this is more advanced than it is. Because I think that is actually kind of a cool stat. Like, as you were saying, it could be cool. If that's your number one illustration of the power of this thing, then maybe it's misapplied. And
then certainly, it's kind of dopey.
Yeah, if you're trying to tell people that this is meaningful in some sense, if you're implying that you have a higher hard hit rate if you tap your bat beforehand, then that's misleading. But I do think that it's cool in a fun toy way. And so if they leaned into that, if they were just like, look, we can track, because you were kind of questioning whether it's real, like with the players hopping over the foul line.
Right.
Like, I just don't. Yeah. And so that's what I want to know. Like, is this actual data? Like, is this made up? Is this imaginary? Like, imagine if we could do this, or this is the kind of thing we could do, but we didn't actually do it. Or is it real? Because if it is real, then that is something that would have blown my mind at one point. If you had told me we could actually track the tapping of home plate or the leaping over the foul line, that would be really cool. That's not like great analysis, really, but it is sort of eye-opening. Like, I might not know how often hitters tap the bat. That's kind of a quirky, fun thing to know. And also just a cool demonstration of the potential of the technology, because if you can track the bat taps, then you can track a lot of other things like the swings that are maybe more meaningful. But it's a cool flex. It's not even a weird flex. It's a fun flex, I think, to say we could track this because everything is trackable. That's something that would have impressed me in sort of a sci-fi way, and maybe also kind of a dystopian Big Brother way, but more in the fun sci-fi way. So that's what I'm wondering about. Like, is this sincere? Is this genuine and legitimate data? Because if it is, then I think that's kind of fun, even if it's not meaningful.
I think it's fun, even if it's not meaningful. I do agree. I do agree with that.
Yeah.
And I have a text out to ask the question about, I've been told that if the question were answered truthfully, that the person I asked would end up at a black site somewhere. And so we'll just never know. We'll just never know.
See, that's the question that lingers in my mind when I see those ads. And that's part of what frustrates me about them, is that I can't tell if this is completely on the level or not. But if it were, I'd allow it and I would welcome it even. But I can't tell if they're being truthful.
Serious?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I mean, I have long been an advocate for the notion that if we could query more things, it would be great and delightful fun. I back in the day had a whole series at BP about like the things that I wish we could query, but I don't know. Well, it's just a mystery.
Yep. Okay, so we will see if the Blue Jays win their must-win. Look, you can't have a headline in the most circulated paper in a country that's just like Game 1 of the World Series is pretty important for the Blue Jays. Like that probably wouldn't work as a headline. So I do think
they'd probably be like,
hey,
try harder on that.
Yeah, have a more original or insightful angle. I don't know that it being a must-win is more insightful, but it is bolder. And it is more attention getting, and that's one of the purposes of a headline. And we'll see how Bo Bichette's Mickey Stanley act goes. I don't know whether this is actually more or less impressive than Mickey Stanley, famously 1968 World Series. He's a center fielder, and he plays shortstop in that series. And that sounds on the surface harder than what Bichette is doing here because it's shortstop and he hadn't really played it before. And that was like, so they wanted to get like Al Kaline in the outfield. I guess that would be the comp here. And so he played shortstop, but he did have a little bit of a run up to that. He had a trial period. I think he played like 9 games at shortstop at the end of the regular season. And that was 68. That was the last year before there was such a thing as a pre-World Series playoff round. So you just jumped right into the World Series. But he did demo that in the regular season beforehand. So it was a late season transition, but it was not actually happening in the World Series, which makes it a little less impressive to me, but more impressive because shortstop. Anyway, we'll talk about all of that. Before we close, just wanted to ask your opinion about a couple of managerial moves. We had a couple of hirings by California teams while I was in California. No connection there. The Angels, who just seem to have angelsed up this managerial hiring process in a number of ways, because it was widely reported that Albert Pujols was the favorite for that job, that he was the top choice. And of course, played for the Angels, had that personal services contract with them, perhaps still does. And so they interview him, and then they end up hiring Kurt Suzuki. And Kurt Suzuki, in addition to his backup catching career, probably the indelible image is him being
just wants to make the Angels great again. That's all he wants to do.
Yes, warmly embraced by President Trump in his first term when the Nationals visited after winning that World Series. But he doesn't have a whole lot of highlights as a coach or manager because he's never been one. So maybe that's why that image has circulated so much. I mean, it would have anyway, but we haven't really seen Suzuki around. I mean, he's been around, but he hasn't coached, he hasn't managed. And I don't know that he was like widely discussed as a top managerial prospect, even though he was a catcher. So they sign him, and I guess it happens often that there is reported to be a first choice and the eventual choice is not the first choice. Yeah. And so you know that, and maybe it's kind of awkward. The other thing, though, is that reportedly, at least, the reason the Angels moved on from Pujols, or he moved on from them, was money, that was sort of the sticking point, money and or years. And then they signed Suzuki to a 1-year deal, which is unusual. I guess back to our conversations, creative. It's non-standard. I'm a little less complimentary about it in this case because 1-year deal, when you hire a manager, it's like usually you don't hire a manager who is instantly a lame duck. That's just an odd.
So like, Angels.
Yeah, it is so Angels. It really is. And there is the whole. So Yusei Kikuchi came out with a recent interview talking to Japanese reporters, and he said that the Angels' air conditioner was broken in the weight room, and so he was constantly like drenched in sweat and like cramping, and it affected his pitching, and he asked them to fix it, and they didn't fix it. That's what he said. And then Sam Blum was talking to Perry Manassian, Angels GM, who denied it and just said, yeah, everything is fine, nothing to see here. Basically, like everything's okay. The air conditioner is perfectly fine. And then later that day, the Angels put a job listing up for an HVAC technician.
Oh my
which
God.
is just like, maybe that was completely unconnected, but the timing of it was just unbelievable. So that on top of this hiring seemingly being dictated, at least in large part, by not wanting to commit to a manager for more than a year. Like, I don't know what Albert Pujols' request was, and maybe we'll find out because he's still interviewing for other gigs here. It's odd because on the one hand, Pujols made $350 million as a player, not counting endorsement deals, not counting personal services contracts, et cetera. So in theory, he shouldn't really need to make that much money as a manager. But also, I assume there's sort of a level of respect that he wants and believes he commands. And one way respect can be expressed is through money. Sure. And maybe this is just Artie cheaping out the way that Artie Moreno tends to do, where historically he has signed players to big contracts, including Albert Pujols, but then he skimps on everything that could make that organization better or more desirable, whether it was minor league conditions and nutrition in the past to possibly this air conditioner to just technology and developmental architecture and infrastructure. And now maybe sort of cheaping out on a manager too and just playing such an active role and meddling constantly. It just seems rudderless. And obviously there's a ton of negative publicity surrounding the Angels right now with the Skaggs case that is working its way through the court, and, you know, Mike Trout testifying and other officials from the team testifying in the Tyler Skaggs case, and just having that all be aired now does not reflect well on really anyone or anything in that situation. The whole thing is sad. But usually you hire a manager and you want that to be a big moment. It's like, okay, new direction, fresh voice. So we're all on the same page. This is what we're doing, turning over a new leaf. And instead it just feels like they somehow backed into this in the most Angels way imaginable.
One of my main takeaways from all of this was that, like, Pujols' managerial ambitions were maybe more serious than I was giving them credit for, right? Because, you know, you could imagine it being like a soft landing as your first gig. Now, I want to distinguish Albert Pujols from Suzuki in this way, which is like, Pujols went and managed in winter ball. Like, Pujols went and did work to try to, like, get experience in that role in a way that I think outstripes. Why can't I speak today? I mean, in my defense, I've already talked a lot today. Yes. And you might think to yourself, don't you talk a lot every day, Meg? And you're so full of funny jokes, aren't you? Outstrips.
Yep, that's the word.
This is a Reddit never said it sort of situation.
Outstriped should be applied to Blake Snell's fashion line. Did you see Blake Snell's? He is, I guess, a fashion designer.
Have you heard him rapping?
No, I did not. I must have missed that, but I did catch his pants.
He has a line of pants?
He does. He has a line of pants.
Like for himself?
For anyone. I think anyone can be wearing Blake Snell if they would like to. But it's like, I would say that his pants have outstriped themselves because
they have stripes on them.
I'll send you a link.
Please do. I need to see these pants.
Yeah, I will link to this on the show page. So there's a top. I guess there's the shirt. It's like
oh my God.
Yeah, it's a partnership.
What the hell are these pants?
I know.
What are these pants, Ben?
The pants. What are those? What? Yeah, it looks like.
What's happening here?
It looks like he walked into wet paint.
It does look like he walked into wet paint.
What's happening? There are
white pants.
Yeah, you took white pants and just like had a paintbrush with blue paint just swiped down each leg. Essentially, that's what it looks like to me.
I do appreciate that he is a Northwest boy. I'm like, of course this is exclusive to Nordstrom because that's our luxury department store. That's the Northwest brand. What is happening in these pants?
I don't know. I
mean, look, I gotta say some stuff because I'm often critical of Blake Snell because I, until very recently, have super not enjoyed watching him. His teammates seem to love him. Like, he seems to just, like, really get along with everybody in the dugout, and that's great. But what are these pants? And also, like, okay, so these pants, I'm like short-circuiting about these pants. These seem to have launched in October. Is that correct? These are like
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So also, and look, I don't need to be a stickler. I'm not such a fancy girl. You're wearing white pants after Labor Day. You're launching your white pant collection after like what are these? What's happening? Yeah. I do not understand.
I don't know. I know nothing about fashion. I'm not qualified to really evaluate Blake Snell's pant design the way that I am his pitching, but I will say that
it looks,
seeing this.
You know how sometimes, okay, so in the first slide of this Instagram little post, you see the collared shirt, right? We have the collared shirt, and on the collared shirt, like in the middle of his tummy, there appears to be a section where there's like white also on it. There's like the white stripe, but then there's like you see how there's like the white.
It looks like he's wearing a lanyard.
But also, so you see the oh God, I have to like send you a screenshot of the particular part I'm talking about. Do you ever have the experience you're wearing like a dark colored shirt and you go to brush your teeth and then you oh no, I got some toothpaste on my shirt, and then you try to wipe it off and then it leaves like toothpaste remnant. Right. Like you see the part I'm talking about here. I just sent it to you in our G chat. What is happening? What's that? What's that about? What?
There's sort of a splotch.
There's like a splotch, or like someone spilled milk and like didn't dab it out, like got yogurt on their shirt. This looks like it's dairy or toothpaste related. What is happening? Also, I'm sorry. I don't want to be ungenerous to Blake Snell, even though I've said that he is like the worst person to watch pitch ever. I just want to understand why is Blake Snell like a fashion guy now? Like, what's happening? What's going on? Like, I'm just saying, like,
look, I guess it's an interest of his, and I'm fine with him pursuing his interest. He has a certain level of celebrity and accomplishment, and people want you to be the face of something. And
do they want that face to be the face of? He's just a very
more about the pants
normal,
of something.
He's a very normal looking guy. This profile of guy is all over Shoreline, which is where he's from, which is why it's
he is like modeling these studs as well.
He's modeling.
We will share it for everyone to see. I forget how this even came up, but no, I mean MLB players, athletes in general, maybe their fashion sense does not always match mine. Maybe mine is wearing sweatpants all day, so I don't have a fashion sense. But if I were to wear something, well, yes, it's true. But I'm not wearing like boutique.
Their wedding photo is so nice.
But there's a lot of Ed Hardy, is what I'm saying, or whatever the modern equivalent of that is. Yes. Anyway, you were saying something about Albert Pujols. Was it that outstripped?
And then we should be done so that we can both go on vocal rest before we live stream. But I have to say, so like Pujols went and managed, and he did a great job, and like he gained all this experience. And I am often fascinated to watch guys as they are in the first couple of years right after their big league career has ended, because not all of them bounce back to the game, but a lot of them do. Yep. And I always am curious, like how much of it is money, how much of it is wanting the routine, how much of it is like needing to fill all this time that you know. And I know that Pujols is like a very dedicated father, but I think he and his wife like got divorced not long after he stopped playing. So it's just like, like you look for a lot of routine in the game, and you find it, and like you love baseball. He was a great player, but also just it's so interesting to me when these guys like ricochet back. But Pujols like put work in, and I wonder if he went into those meetings with Artie and was like, no, I'm trying to like be serious, I have expended effort to gain expertise and experience doing this. And like, I think I have something to contribute to a club, and you're fundamentally unserious. And I'm putting hypothetical words in Pujols' mouth. I'm sure he didn't say any of those things, but I wonder if he got into that meeting and was like, oh, like I'm really trying to be about it, and you want to hire Kurt Suzuki, I guess. So
Pujols was a member of that organization long enough that you'd think, the more that comes out about the Angels, it just makes you question, why was and is Mike Trout so loyal to the Angels?
I know because they drafted him. Well.
He's always been there, but it's not like a first-class organization, seemingly in any respect, really.
No, so they do not treat their people well.
inspires such specific loyalty. Anyway, just in closing, because I was kind of pairing the two California managerial moves, the Suzuki one is probably the less interesting one. I mean, it's, everyone joked about it because it's Lowell Angels and their whole process just seems to be borked as usual. But the Giants made the maybe more atypical and out-of-the-box managerial hire with Tony Vitello. And even though I am, as some people may be aware, not a huge college baseball guy, I do find this pretty fascinating. This was another case where there was a reputed favorite who did not end up being the choice because Nick Hundley was said to be the front runner. And, he and Posey go way back, and obviously he was a player, and he also did not have coaching or managing experience, but was at least like doing front office stuff, worked for the league, was like around MLB and MLB teams. And obviously Tony Vitello has not been. And so this is an unprecedented hiring for a college head coach to immediately make the leap to managing an MLB team. And that just hasn't happened before. Everyone knows, Pat Murphy was a Division I head coach, but he was an MLB coach for years and a bench coach before he became a manager. And people have mentioned Dick Hauser, who went from Florida State to the Yankees in 1980. But that was not the same. He was moonlighting as a college coach. Before that, he had been a big league player. He had been a Yankees coach for 10 years. So the college coaching was what was the exception to the rule for him, not the other way around. And same when the Angels hired Bobby Winkles from Arizona State. This was 1973, but he had spent a season on their coaching staff with the Angels, that is. So for someone who has just no MLB experience at any level, in any capacity, as a player, as a coach, to go straight to the majors, that just hasn't happened. And it's exciting. There's a higher risk of a flame out, I suppose, given all the uncertainties of that transition, which is not unusual in other sports, obviously. There's plenty of precedent for that happening in other sports where there's, a higher profile to the college game than there is in baseball. And even though I don't follow college sports closely or college baseball, I've written a fair amount about college coaching and player development and how we've seen an influx of coaches from the college ranks to MLB. That's been pretty common in recent years just because college has been really a hotbed of player development and advanced player development for years now. So it makes sense that this would happen, I guess, at this stage and not at an earlier stage. But it is still, it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Like, this is really interesting. And he got a big contract for a rookie manager. He didn't just get 1 year. He got 3 years with an option for a fourth at $3.5 million per.
Well, yeah, he's not going to go for less money than he was getting at Tennessee.
Exactly. Right. And that, he was making $3 million annually there with a $3 million buyout. And that's the other thing, is that college coaches make bank. Like,
they make big money.
Yeah. Compared to money. You'd think MLB, that's got to be bigger money. No, not necessarily.
Nothing compared to boosters, my friend. That's nothing compared to boosters.
Exactly. So that's one thing that has prevented this from happening before that, is that it's a pretty cushy and well-compensated job. So it's not necessarily a promotion. It sounds like, oh, you're going from amateur ball to the highest level of pro ball.
Right.
Yeah, but in terms of salary and benefits and profile and all the rest of it, there are a lot of advantages to being a college coach. So Vitello is 47 and like he's a personality, right? And you probably know this better than I do. And Bauman has written at length about him, of course, but I don't know if he seeks the spotlight. He certainly doesn't avoid the spotlight. And he's, like pretty flashy, pretty attention-getting, good-looking guy, quotable, fiery, gets run from a lot of games. We could have a new Aaron Boone on our hands here potentially, and has a track record of inspiring players and also of success. We should note that's, in the college game, however transferable that is, we will see. But he's been doing this for a long time. Like he was an assistant coach at a few different schools, and then he's been at Tennessee for 8 seasons. They've been to the College World Series 3 out of the past 5 and won last year. So, they're getting an elite talent in college baseball coaching here. Although I guess sometimes a pretty polarizing one just because of how high profile a figure he is and how he kind of embraces that. So what do you make of the move?
I have no idea if this is going to work. I thought Bauman did a really great job writing about this for us, and we should probably have him on at some point to talk about it. But the things that have made him super successful at the college level, some of them I think are transferable, like being able to command a room. He's going to be great in front of the media. I think that he does inspire players. Great, transferable. Whether they will translate in the way that he does it, I think remains to be seen, but those are transferable skills. Some of the things that he does, we don't know, right? Like college head coaches are as much like GMs as they are like managers.
Yeah.
And some of those pieces I think might blend well with Posey, but some of them are going to be like irrelevant to Vitello just because like you're not trying to, navigate the transfer portal. You're not trying to, dole out NIL money. Sure, maybe there's some parallels to free agency there, but it is a fundamentally different project. You're recruiting, very young players relative to what he's going to encounter when he gets to the majors. Some of the like grinded out stuff isn't going to play over 162 game season. As Bauman noted, it'll be really interesting to see sort of how he calibrates some of the stuff that I think made him really effective at Tennessee. The ability to assemble a staff that could increase velo, all of their strength and conditioning gains. Like guys do get stronger when they go there. Some of that stuff is great. Some of that stuff doesn't necessarily matter in the same way for guys who are already pros and have already been in like a pro strength and conditioning program. You can't just throw velocity at everything. Like you do have to develop other stuff. So some of that's going to be interesting to see. I find the vibe of that team, that Tennessee team, to suck out loud. I appreciate why people like it. And I do think that like he does a good job of letting his guys be themselves. It's just so happens that some of the personalities he's assembled are ones that I find abrasive and terrible. So, your mileage might vary there, but he's also not dealing with as young a player pool. And so he's going to have to, I think he'll do a good job of being respectful of pro players, but like some of the like rah that he does a good job of at Tennessee is like, if you're Logan Webb or Willie Adames, you're going to be like, what are you doing, man?
That's the thing. Yeah, that's what fascinates me. And of course, Drew Gilbert is a former player for him, and many former players of his have gone on to be good in the majors and speak highly of him.
Sure.
But yes, there have been some spectacular flameouts before from highly touted college coaches in other sports who went on to pro ball and just it didn't translate. And maybe it didn't translate tactically or strategically, but also, in terms of how you relate to the players, he clearly has the capacity to inspire players and get them to play hard for him and like him and everything. But it is different. You're talking about teenagers or early 20-somethings versus real grown-ups, and some guys who aren't even that much younger than he is. And so it's like, does that rub you the wrong way if you're doing that, like, super rah-rah, as you said, and, go get him and that whole mentality over a very long season with guys who've also like been in the game more than you have in the pro game, that is. And so who are you to come in and tell us, right? There's always kind of that, like, is there a lack of credibility if you haven't been a big leaguer in any capacity before? And then, you're used to like pumping up kids basically versus adults. Sometimes it's like, it feels, I don't know, infantilizing or so, or almost. It's like, okay, this works in college, but not here. So that will be quite fascinating.
Yeah, or at least, very young men. Mm-hmm. And they're young men in a pro dugout too.
Yeah.
I think that part of why, if I can maybe put a little more substantive heft behind the part of his whole style that I find grating, I do think that like he does a good job of inspiring his guys. And I think his affection for them is very genuine. Like he was there the night that, speaking of the Angels, he was there the night that Christian Moore got drafted, and he was at the desk, and like the look on Tony's face when Christian Moore got drafted was like so genuine and so full of like tender feeling for this guy. And so I don't want to say that like it's all pretend or that there isn't anything positive to it, but there have been times where my read of his coaching style at Tennessee was like, yeah, let kids be themselves, let young men be themselves, but guide young men. Sometimes young men need to be told to knock it off because they're being fucking obnoxious, and they have gone over the line of being confident and celebratory and themselves to being dicks, and part of your responsibility when you are a coach or an educator of people that age is to help them learn where those lines are. And I think it's particularly important. I'm not saying Christian Moore was one of the guys, but like, there has been an edge to that Tennessee team at times. And I do think that you have a responsibility to help them navigate that line in a way that's going to be productive, particularly if they're going to end up being pros with a bunch of money. You just have to help them figure that stuff out. That's part of your responsibility as a coach. And there have been times where I've been like, you could be a little less loose, Tony. Now, those considerations exist in the pro game. They're less pronounced because everybody's older, everybody has different responsibilities, but it's not like teams don't have plenty of young guys who need guidance, right? And they have a bunch of money too. So, because like players at Tennessee get paid. Like, I don't mean that in a nefarious way. I just mean that they have like they handle NIL well, and those guys get money. So there's that piece of it. And I'll be curious to see how he navigates that. But also, like, my sensibilities and the sensibilities of a pro locker room are probably different. So it might play fine. And the final thing I'll say is that, Posey was viewed as this, like, and I don't think that was an incorrect assessment, this kind of like old school hire. There was a concern that he was just going to run it back. Some of the guys he brought in, it was like, these are players whose names he knows. And so I do think it's a really interesting departure in the early part of his tenure for him to make a super unconventional hire and one that is challenging establishment norms. Is it going to work? I don't know. Is it going to be good for the Giants? I have no idea. And I think anyone who's like, oh yeah, this is definitely good or definitely bad is selling you something, because there's so many different ways this could go. It's a super high variance hire. And sometimes that is great. And sometimes that is a catastrophe, and we just don't know yet. But like, it is a really interesting move for Posey to be making, given sort of our understanding of him as a GM at this stage. So like, I am fascinated. Also, I said this on Blue Sky, and people need to reckon with it. The number of horny texts that I got about this man when he was on draft broadcasts from people who, know Major League Baseball, but are only engaging with the college game via the draft, and thus only really seeing the coaching, Tony via the draft. Listen, friends, you need to prepare yourselves. People are going to be really freaking weird about this guy. They're going to be horny on Maine in a way that makes you uncomfortable. So just like strap in, because I could not believe some of the texts that I got. People have thoughts about, and I'm not sharing any thoughts myself. I'm saying I got multiple texts from different people being like, who's that? And I'm like, you need to relax. So get ready.
There was a Gabe Kapler contingency of that kind as well, but perhaps it's a different
it's going to be similar, but it's going to be a little different. It's a related, but importantly different aesthetic than Gabe.
Yeah, but you're right that Posey, he's going out on a limb a little bit here, because if this does backfire, then that sort of sticks to him. And it is admirable in a way that he's not saying, I'm just going to go get Boch. Like, we're bringing Boch back, but I'm doing something no one has done. I guess it can be new and also slightly old school at the same time, because I think one thing that they've both talked about, Posey and Vitello, is just like fundamentals and development. And we've talked about that larger meta conversation about the sport and fundamentals and whether players know what they're doing, even if they are more talented than ever. And Vitello, he was in San Francisco for a series, I think, or forget whether it was at Coors or in San Francisco, but
I think they were in visiting Colorado. Yeah,
that might have been it.
If I remember that report right, yeah.
Because he had a bunch of former players there, and so he went and they talked. He and Posey talked. Then Posey went too, and Vitello talked afterward and said, I think everyone is suffering the consequences all the way up to the big leagues where guys are super skilled, but there's less development, less coaching, less accountability, and therefore less understanding of how to actually play the game to win. And it starts all the way trickle-down effect. He said that on a podcast subsequently.
Yeah.
So you could see this as the antidote to that. Okay, we'll go get a college coach when you're actually still teaching players the fundamentals, right, and we'll remind these major leaguers of those things that they've forgotten or never learned. That could also backfire or rub people the wrong way, because it's like, who are you? You know, like you're coming not even from the bush leagues. You're from amateur ball here, and you're telling me how to play the game the right way. How are you qualified to talk? So it depends on the message and the messenger.
And it'll depend in part on who he brings in, right? How much of that staff is turning over. I don't know if we know the answer to that yet.
And also just like, is the team good? Will the team win? You know, because that'll affect how the clubhouse is also. But yeah, it feels like a low floor but high ceiling move, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you take away the recruiting advantage mostly, I guess. Not that a manager plays no role in say, making a place a more attractive destination for free agents, but it's not the same, obviously. And, you know, crafting the roster, it's not the same. And he's not known as like a super stat head, not that he's like anti-numbers or anything, but I don't know that he has that reputation as like being at the forefront of that. And if his coaches are responsible for some of the player development acumen, then does that transfer with him or not? And the other thing is that, like, in the big leagues these days, player development is ongoing. It's not the way that it used to be, where guys were viewed as finished products and you developed in the minors and then you got to the big leagues and then the coaches were just the manager's drinking buddies. There is supposed to be active development and players improving going on. Yeah. And I think that's part of the desire to have this kind of coach come in. So if he is personally responsible for players having improved under him, as opposed to just putting the right coaches in place, which, you know, that will still be to some extent his purview now. So he could bring back some of his coaches, or he could make some adept hires there to help him. And maybe there could still be development that goes on. And the Giants have experimented with that. And they've had in recent years pre-Posey as Pobo, but they had their expanded coaching staff with, you know, assistant this and assistant that and assistant to the assistant. And that seemed to pay dividends at least for a little while. And they've had some maybe analytical edges with swing paths and stuff where they were able to kind of optimize their player usage and pinch hitting and everything. And I don't know if those advantages have persisted, but they've been known for kind of being forward thinking when it comes to coaching or development at the big league level. So maybe this is a continuation of that. Anyway, fundamentally, I'm into it just because it's interesting to talk about, more so than it is with most managerial hirings where it's just some retread or some predictable person. This is not predictable, and this is unconventional, and that means that there's more to discuss, which is good for us people who discuss baseball professionally. I don't have a personal stake in whether the Giants do well or not, though. It would be nice, you know, like if this hit and they were great, or if they just completely flamed out and crashed and burned, at least they wouldn't be just persistently 500 every year on the dot. So that would be a nice change.
I agree.
All right, returning for my outro recording post-game and post-stream to report that the Dodgers have been Blue Jaysed. Blake Snell was not at his best, and then the much-maligned Dodgers bullpen showed why it has been much maligned in a 9-run inning in which the Blue Jays exceeded the sum total of offense that the Brewers produced in their whole NLCS. It was single after hit by pitch after walk, and then there were a couple big bombs in there too. Capped off by a Barger bomb, 11-4 win for Toronto. The Blue Jays executed the plan to perfection that the Dodgers' previous opponents were not able to reliably. Get the starter out, stick it to the bullpen. I still say it wasn't a must-win, but they did indeed win. Dodgers got a couple of their low-leverage arms in there. Some guys who hadn't even been on rosters in previous rounds, Justin Wroblewski, Will Klein. I think those guys are actually pretty good and could potentially play an important role with Alex Vesia out, but by the time they got into this game, it was well out of hand. Late homer by Shohei, but this time he didn't hit 3 or pitch, so it was not enough. Roberts must be saving Kershaw for the home crowd. Since I was talking about this being a series for a global audience, though, we did get a question from listener Patreon supporter Jeff, who asked, is this the most World Series? Thinking about how important Ohtani and Yamamoto are to the Dodgers and Vlad to the Blue Jays, is this the World Series with the most WAR from foreign-born players? If not, which is? Did Soto on the Yankees top it last year without us noticing? I put this question to Patreon supporter and listener Michael Mountain, who stat blasted it for us and wrote this summary for me of his findings. I excluded all players born in the United States, including U.S. territories. This mostly means no Puerto Rican players, but there were also 3 players with World Series experience who were born in the U.S. Virgin Islands: Midre Cummings, Joe Christopher, Elrod Hendricks. The 2025 games haven't happened yet, so we can't compare WAR among players who appeared in a World Series game. Perhaps we could look at that later. And finding active roster data for past years is difficult. I ended up looking at WAR for all players who appeared in at least one regular season game for the eventual league champions, and dropping any players with negative WAR, since those would likely not be World Series participants or certainly not major contributors. Then again, I guess Roki Sasaki had negative FanGraphs WAR, and he's a pretty important contributor. The single-season baseball reference WAR total for all non-U.S. born players on the 2025 Dodgers and Blue Jays rosters combined is 32.1, 22.6 from the Dodgers, 9.5 from the Blue Jays. That's the 5th highest total for any World Series matchup, and all the ones ahead of it are in the period 2019 to 2024. Makes sense. Game has gotten more international. Jeff is correct that last year's World Series set the record without us noticing. Maybe someone noticed. Led by Shohei and Soto, the 2024 Dodgers and Yankees got 39.7 baseball reference WAR from 22 different foreign-born players in the regular season. Other significant contributors that year with more than one baseball reference WAR were Teoscar Hernandez, Miguel Rojas, Luis Gil, Nestor Cortez, Gleyber Torres, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Jazz Chisholm, Andy Pajes, and Oswaldo Cabrera. The record for most foreign-born WAR on a single World Series participant team is the 2022 Houston Astros with 31.3. They had 12 players accumulate positive B-WAR in the regular season, led by Yordan Alvarez, Jose Altuve, Jeremy Pena, Christian Javier, and Framber Valdez. If you want to count world influence as the number of foreign-born players who appeared in the series, there were 18 foreign-born players in the 2022 World Series. The record for most number of birth countries represented in a World Series is 9, set in 2018. Players in that series were born in the U.S., Aruba, Cuba, sound like I'm singing Kokomo here, Curacao, the Dominican Republic, Japan, South Korea, Mexico, and Venezuela. Finally, shout out to Jose Urena, who, as far as I can tell, is the first foreign-born player in MLB history to accumulate positive baseball reference WAR for both World Series participants in the current season. Negative 0.1 each for Toronto and Los Angeles. Obviously, other players have appeared for both World Series teams, but I don't think anyone else has been above 0.1 WAR for both. Buddy Kennedy is the other guy who played for both of this year's World Series teams, but he's from Millville, New Jersey. Of course, the most famous player from Millville, New Jersey, Buddy Kennedy. We just got a Patreon message as I'm recording this from listener Jacob, who says, in the postgame show, Derek Jeter just called Game 2 a must-win for the Dodgers. Game 2. So we've gone from Game 1 being a must-win for the Jays to Game 2 being a must-win for the Dodgers. It's really something. Bo Bichette looked fine in second base, by the way. He made a nice play behind the bag. Technically, it was on the shortstop side of second base, so it was actually not far from where he typically plays, though he was going in a different direction. Ultimately, they pinch ran for him. And Trey Savage, while not lights out and not as splitterific as usual, was good enough, more than good enough for a guy who has blown by his previous single-season innings high, and who was the second youngest starter of a World Series opener behind Ralph Branca, and who now has more career postseason starts than regular season starts. That's a stat that tickles me. And you can tickle me too, in a platonic, non-physical way. We don't have a Patreon tier for that, but you can support Effectively Wild on Patreon by going to patreon.com/effectivelywild, as have the following 5 listeners who have already signed up, and pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get themselves access to some perks. Dave, Vincent Beltran, Omar Perez, Jake Andrews, and David Gordon. thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include access to the Effectively Wild Discord group for patrons only, monthly bonus episodes, the playoff live streams, which are concluded now for this year, but you can still access the recordings of them if you care to, personalized messages, potential podcast appearances, discounts on merch, and ad-free FanGraphs memberships, and so much more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast platforms. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild. And you can check the show notes at FanGraphs or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. We hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will be back to talk to you next week.
Have a catch and a slog with me in a virtual rise. From small sample size, these fun facts must lie. It's